United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, has recognized and appreciated the rising profile of asset recovery in Nigeria. UNCAC, according to Reverend David Ugolo, the World Vice President of UNCAC Coalition and the Executive Director of Africa Network for Environment and Economic Justice, ANEJ, recognized Nigeria as the world-leading asset recovery at its 2023 resolution after a week-long meetings of Conference of the States Parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, COSC-10, held in Atlanta, United States, between December 11 and 15, 2023 with more than 300 civil society organizations and almost 1,000 human rights activists in attendance. David Ugolo, who led other ANEJ team members to the meeting in Atlanta, USA, in a message of commendation issued and made available on Monday, said, "The UNCAC resolution is a big victory for everyone working for Nigeria assets to be recovered and given back to the country." In quotes, David Ugolo said, "I am particularly elated about Nigeria's rising profile as a leading country in asset recovery and beneficial ownership transparency of legal persons and legal arrangements in the UN. This is coming after intense and difficult rounds of negotiations, which commenced in Vienna in November, and to the glory of God, the draft resolution on beneficial ownership transparency was agreed in the Committee of Whole, now adopted as a resolution of COSC-10. This is big victory for those of us working in the sector." The resolution highlights a significant step forward in the global fight against corruption. The commitment to enhancing beneficial ownership transparency aligns with our mission to hold those engaging in corrupt acts accountable. The conference, in its resolution on enhancing the use of beneficial ownership information to strengthen asset recovery, underscores the crucial role of beneficial ownership transparency in combating corruption and addressing the misuse of legal entities for concealing illicit proceeds. We are encouraged that the conference recognizes that the loss of resources caused by corruption, including complex cases such as those involving multiple national jurisdictions and vast quantities of assets, which constitutes a substantial proportion of the resources of states, and particularly has a negative impact on developing countries like Nigeria. We are particularly happy that the 10th session of the Conference of the States Parties, COSC-10, to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, also recognized Nigeria as one of the leading countries in the implementation of beneficial ownership transparency by developing its register, which can be accessed on the Nigerian Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, NETI's website, Ugolo said. And it was also noted that, with the register, any person can easily ascertain who owns what in Nigerian companies and limited liability partnerships, LLPs. This is crucial in combating corruption, illicit financial flows, and other forms of criminality under the cover of companies and LLPs. It also promotes transparency in the conduct of business in Nigeria. He urged state parties, including the Nigerian government, to ensure access to adequate, accurate and up-to-date beneficial ownership information of legal persons and legal arrangements, and, as necessary, consider maintaining historical records that is searchable by domestic competent authorities, including, as appropriate, financial intelligence units and tax administrations, in accordance with domestic law. Civil society and the media should have access to updated information on the platform. To promote and combat the scourge called corruption, we urge state parties to cooperate closely with one another, bearing in mind the need to provide one another the widest measures of international cooperation, in accordance with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and domestic law, to facilitate the efficient exchange of adequate, accurate and up-to-date beneficial ownership information in a timely manner, and where appropriate and feasible, through the use of digital and innovative technologies, including to facilitate the recovery and return of assets, Ugolo noted. He called on state parties to adopt a multipurpose approach to beneficial ownership transparency through appropriate mechanisms that provide access to adequate, accurate and up-to-date beneficial ownership information on legal persons and legal arrangements in order to facilitate the investigation and prosecution of cases of corruption and the identification, recovery and return of stolen assets in accordance with the Convention and the fundamental principles of their domestic law. Recall that Section 119 of the Companies and Allied Matters Act, CAMA, 2020, in conjunction with the Persons with Significant Control Regulations, PSC Regulations, 2022, requires companies, limited liability partnerships, LLPs, and by extension, foreign exempted companies under Section 80 of CAMA 2020 and government-owned entities in Nigeria to disclose details of their beneficial owners and those with significant control over the company. This is in line with global efforts to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, and other illegal activities. Section 119(3) mandates the Corporate Affairs Commission, the CAC, to maintain a register of persons with significant control, also known as the Beneficial Ownership Register, the register, in the relevant entities. Meanwhile, during the week in Atlanta, an IC team led by the Executive Director, Reverend David Ugolo, participated in a breakfast meeting with the U.S. government officials amongst other civil society leaders from countries facing high risk of corruption on the margins of the coast to the UNCAC. The meeting was hosted by the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative, ABAROI, as part of their Justice Sector Training Research and Coordination (Just Track) program in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs (INL) and Office of the Coordinator on Global Anti-Corruption. Earlier, the Vice President of UNCAC Coalition Board and Executive Director, ANIJ, Reverend David Ugolo, interviewed Matthias Schutter, Managing Director, UNCAC Coalition, and the Managing Director shared insights on the 10th session of the Conference of the State Parties of the UNCAC. The Conference of the States Parties, COS, is the main decision-making body of the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC. Also at the meeting, Nigeria Justice Minister restates Nigeria's commitment to fight against corruption, money laundering at the global rally. The leader of the delegation of Nigeria and Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Honorable Lateef Fagbemi, expressed Nigeria's commitment at the 10th Conference of States Parties to the UNCAC held at the Georgia World Congress Center in Atlanta, United States. The Justice Minister assured the civil societies of Nigeria unwavering commitment to the fight against corruption, money laundering and illicit financial flows at the global rally of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC.
So Matthias, how do you feel about the COS 10?
Great. Great in terms of civil society participation. We have more than 330 organizations from civil society are participating here. We have more than 900 activists from all over the world registered. So in terms of civil society participation, this COS is a big step in the right direction. And now civil society here is fighting for governments to commit to new, stronger resolutions that would really move the anti-corruption agenda forward. For example, on beneficial ownership transparency, where Nigeria is tabling and leading a resolution to advance the transparency of who ultimately owns and controls companies and legal entities. We're trying to advance the transparency of public contracting, the protection of whistleblowers, the links between gender and corruption, between organized crime and corruption. Also, we're trying to raise awareness for victims of corruption and get commitments on the redress to victims of corruption. So a lot of efforts from civil society to move the agenda forward. Too early to say how successful we are, but there's lots of energy and lots of great collaboration from activists all around.
What is your expectation on the Atlanta Declaration?
That is, right now we're on the Tuesday, so the declaration is finalized by the Friday. It's too early to tell. It's very politicized also. We're here in the United States, and there are some countries that are undermining negotiations because of political motivations and their relationship to the United States. So it's too early to tell what we will get in terms of substance, but the focus of the host country Atlanta Declaration is on accountability. So we are trying to emphasize also the role of political financing transparency there and the accountability. We're trying to focus on the role of civil society. So many important issues that we hope will be covered by that.